Okay, welcome and welcome back, everyone. Our next session is going to be a panel presentation, and I'll be your moderator for this session. We'll continue to be posting information in the chat regarding information surrounding the summit. And we have captioning enabled, which you can access through the Zoom itself or in a separate link, the stream text, which will be pasted in the chat. And we have our amazing interpreters here with us as well. So we'll get started. And this panel is entitled The Act of Noticing and is a focus from both an incredible researcher as well as some fantastic students who are going to share their experiences. So could you hit the next slide for us? Oh, perfect. So I will introduce myself. Some of you may have seen me first thing this morning, and I'm back again. My name is Stephanie. My pronouns are she and they. I am one of the organizers and co-founders of this event. I'll also be representing my own organization, Consilium Scholars, which is a for-profit tutoring service, if you're interested. But is a lot of the ways that I got to know some of the amazing students that we'll be hearing from later. So I'll hand it over to our next person, Elizabeth.
Hello, I am Elizabeth Pineo, and my pronouns are she, her. I am a 20-something young woman with red hair tied back in a ponytail, and I'm wearing light brown glasses and a purple cardigan that my siblings have assured me is in fact not cool over a gray shirt. I have a tan speckled virtual background that is supposed to be reminiscent of parchment. I am an information studies PhD student here at the University of Maryland, where I also got my MLIS. And I work with Including Disability as the Director of Strategic and Creative Operations. For this project, I help to coordinate things and get all these wonderful, wonderful people together to share their experiences and ideas. And with that, I will turn it over to our other Stephanie to introduce herself.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and Stephanie as well. My name is also Stephanie. I use she, her pronouns mainly. And I have a couple of different roles here at the University of Maryland. I am primarily a full-time staff member doing academic advising for students in physics and astronomy department. I also am a graduate student in the PhD doctoral program in the Department of Education, and I focus on physics education and retention in the work that I do. And a majority of this presentation is going to talk a bit about how I got there and how I feel those things intertwine. So if we could go over to our next slide. So this is just kind of giving you a little bit of a background of who I am going into this position. I am someone who is diagnosed with ADHD, peer-reviewed autistic, and I have a Unitarian Universalist background, which is a religious faith if you are not aware of it. And that is the first place that I was taught how to interact in community building and do teaching. And they very fundamentally set up that in order to do teaching well, you need to care for a student's entire well-being first. And it is only when they are in a place of self-fulfillment and safety and calm that they are able to actually interact meaningfully with the content. So if a student is having a hard time at home, if a world event has happened, that is now the primary thing that you are dealing with in that day before you get to whatever was in your lesson plan. And that became a very prominent way in how I navigated community development and the things I found important in future teaching in my life. So I wanted to preface that there. I was told this at one point, and like a very traditional autistic person, I took it quite literally. As I developed in undergrad, I ended up declaring a physics and astronomy double major, and I had already had some background in teaching and community development from my congregation, and ended up becoming an in a presidential role in a few different student groups on campus, namely the Society of Physics Students for the physics majors there. And at the time it was Women in Physics. Now at our campus, it's Physicists for Underrepresented Genders. And I brought a lot of that perspective into taking into account our whole personhood into how I developed community there from a student leadership position. Maybe people are noticing that this started to become a bit of a special interest and decided that it would be cool to do more research on it, and then maybe even go to graduate school and spend even more time thinking about how to build good programs and support people who are minoritized in physics. So that's why I ended up going into a graduate program, because I was already doing some of that stuff and working with people in research. And I continued to study retention and community building in STEM spaces, specifically for students with disabilities and gender minorities. More recently, in the spring of 2023, I started working full-time as I am writing thesis work in the background as an academic advisor in the physics department, where I was explicitly instructed to be responsible for the development of about half of our majors, which is about 180 students. I was told it was my job to help make sure that they were on track to complete their major and be a fully fledged scientist. And so again, I took that to heart and I took that quite literally. And so this was the birth of me making a larger spreadsheet. I get a list from the college every single semester of every student that I'm supposed to be talking with. They are required to talk with me before they are allowed to register for their classes next semester. And I wanted to make sure that I was being very intentional in the process of reaching out to these students, making sure that they had multiple reminders, making sure I noticed if they hadn't responded or made an appointment, or if they had made their appointments, following up with them pretty directly right after, and making sure that they were being noticed in either their proactivity or in their absence. And often through this process, I am the first person to notice that a student hasn't responded to their emails or hasn't been showing up for classes for a couple of weeks and reaching out to them. I also wanted to have a helpful framework in how I would navigate these conversations when I did meet with students, both for myself and for the students. And so this became the birth of both of a prep sheet. So not only do I have a spreadsheet where I'm quite literally taking data and checking off boxes and using that as a tool to make sure I'm following up with the students that I'm responsible for, and I'm comparing it to the paper notes that I have to also make sure that students I have on paper notes are being noticed, even if they are not on this digital sheet from the college, and there are usually a few students that I notice through that. But I have a checklist of what to say in these appointments, and for students to know what to expect on how to prepare for these appointments and act on these appointments. And I use a framework based on my UU background. So if we go to the next slide, there's some history that goes into the framework that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to more briefly go over this, and there are other resources, and I'm happy to talk more about this. But instead of just using Maslow's hierarchy of needs to make sure that we're talking about the whole thing, I got super nerdy about this, and I wanted to get into the history of how that developed into the framework that I am using. In 1943, Maslow, as the hierarchy of needs, published the first documentations for that. And over the course of the next 50 some odd-ish years, close to 70 years, we see a research to practice pipeline, where this thing that was written for academics was then implemented into international organizations like WHO, the World Health Organization, on how we define overall well-being. That then was being used as a basis to create, primarily for rich, wealthy people in California, wellness centers that are defining wellness with this overarching terminology that includes the things that you may be familiar with in the hierarchy of needs, as far as like hunger and your living environment. That eventually expanded to include multiple other aspects and dimensions, which eventually came to Dr. Margaret Swarbrick's model with 8 full dimensions. The dimensions that get added over time are in particular added for people or because people who are less economically advantaged are using these frameworks. And adding some nuance to it. And it's actually the University of Maryland that has some of the very first publications, not just for a student body to think about wellness on campus through these 8 different aspects, but they're specifically publishing things for the general public to use, not just academics, not students who are on their way to being academics, but for anybody who is able to search up on their website or see some of the pieces of paper and documentation that they give out at community events. So about 70 years for this research to practice pipeline that developed the model that we are going to be talking about a little bit today. If we go on to the next slide, I did want to take a minor moment to emphasize that Maslow's hierarchy of needs stood on Indigenous voices. Maslow actually went and visited the Blackfeet Nation before publishing his work, and notably talked about how self-actualization was the basis of a hierarchy of needs, if there was a hierarchy of needs in the Blackfeet Nation. And specifically wrote in his paperwork about how he didn't like the idea of trying to frame it as a hierarchy, but didn't know of another way to talk about it to Western civilizations, and how the Blackfoot Nation, or Blackfeet Nation specifically, said that these things need to happen first. You need to be self-actualized first and in a place of calmness first, and before you can give back to your community, because you should give back to your community from a place of wholeness, not a place of deprivation. This very much goes back to where I came from when I was studying things and things I was taught from my UU background. So keeping an idea there, which brings us to our next slide and some of the questions that I'm already seeing in the chat of the final dimensions of wellness, which I have been using from Swarbrick. The two additional asterisks, sorry, I'm noticing some of the chats popping up as I'm talking. The two additional asterisks in particular were things that were added as more people from, common man, not just like Silicon Valley elites, were actually using this model. And typically we're mentioning more financial stress and environmental stress. Environmental being not just the specific room that you are in, but the neighborhood that you're in, the supports that you have, the health of the water and the trees around you. These are all different aspects of what we would say are overall wellness for a person. When using this model, and we include financial and intellectual, emotional, social, occupational, physical, intellectual, all of these things, we would say that we're getting into a place of not thriving if we have more than 2 of these starting to be ignored. If we have more than 3 of these going really low, we are starting to see a student on the edge of crisis. And so I use this as, politically not thriving. I use this as a way to ask questions about my students and to make sure that before I even begin talking with them about their next semester, that I am really taking the time and forcing them to slow down and take the time to think about their whole well-being. When we're thinking about students with disabilities, this might be the first time that they are opening up to me about how the lab classroom is physically difficult for them to get to, or that they have troubles navigating the buildings on campus. I might notice as they're talking to me about how they're interacting with their classes that they are probably experiencing some kind of test anxiety and would benefit from accommodations. And I use this as a way to to point them to other resources and help navigate them through this process. So there's more on the model, but I want to get into how it's actually being used and not take up too much more time. So let's go to the next slide. Sweet. So in the process of asking these questions and talking with students, you'll notice a few things in the numbers here. In my first semester, I wasn't taking numbers on this as intimately because it was my first semester in the job. But as we continue going through, you'll notice a couple of things. The students who are fully withdrawing from a specific semester or going silent, ghosting in some way, me having to do some extra work to figure out what happened to them by reaching out, looking on their profile, is going down. While these numbers are small, it's important to know that they're still going down, and that act of being intentional and noticing and reaching out consistently, often calling students actually on the phone, has been really helpful in reducing the amount of students who are not able to complete our major or complete that semester, and connecting them earlier on with resources that might be able to help them survive that specific semester. You may also notice that the total number of majors is increasing over time, which is indicating to me, and from the conversations that I've been having with students, that the community that we are developing through these conversations has been impacting students' want to be in physics and is pulling them towards physics from other majors on our campus, including other STEM majors, because they have people in physics who are actively talking about how important it is for them to have sleep and how important it is for them to have club activities and to have friends on campus, partly because I'm encouraging that from a top-down authority. Some of the students that you notice in these numbers are in the process of actively coming back to the major. So while I have 7 students who went away in the spring of 24, I have 4 of those students in the process of re-enrolling right now, coming back. So that's really helpful to see, and there are more nebulous bits to this number that I'm able to show in this moment. If we go to the next slide, please. Sorry, cool. In these conversations, a student's average sleep has increased quite dramatically. The first 2 semesters that I was asking, the average sleep was about 4 hours. We are now getting closer to about 7.5, or 6.5 to 7 hours, which is great. Students are prioritizing being social more and actively talking about that in their career planning. And they're being more involved in paid positions. And we have more students actively getting successfully through the accommodation process. And that's partly because they're more understanding and humanizing of my needs as well. And I share their stories, my stories as well. I went through accommodations. I tell them that I went through accommodations. I can actively be an example of someone who completed the degree and have gotten into a doctoral program, and I help them go through the intake appointment process. I'm introducing different programmatic supports that get them into honors programs and get them into paid positions, scholarships and things, but also introducing them directly to people, offering them to be involved in different kinds of research. I know that part of what my job is to help them complete the degree, and that can have a lot of different subparts. And one large part of that they never get graded on is navigating really large systems. And that I feel like is my job. So I often tell students that they should not be worrying about anything for more than 15 minutes before they email me, because it's my job to worry about it with them and do it like with them together. And that helps a lot. If we go on to the next slide, we start to see a few quotes from students as this has gone through these experiences. No one has asked me how I'm feeling emotionally since I started college, so thank you for asking. This came from a triple major who has multiple other people who are supposed to be checking in with them, and apparently I'm the first one who actually asked how they were feeling. Thank you for sharing the Neurodivergent Student Club. It feels so nice to be seen. Thank you for helping me feel okay taking a break from school for a while. I really needed that support, and I feel much more confident coming back now. And that's from a student who's currently going through re-enrollment after we talked about my own experiences taking a semester off from school and needing to take that time and how it felt coming back. So I'm glad that I had that experience to share. On the next one. This is a longer quote, but I really like it. It shows the humanizing that I get from students who hold me accountable to also, speak, like do the things that I am telling them to do. So I emailed the student when I was sick and they emailed me back saying, please rest. I hope you get better. But they also went through an experience of having failed a course, needing to get accommodations, and then retake the course. And in here, we can see if we're using some discourse analysis, some fancy ways of analyzing how people speak. I wanted to thank you so much for your support and let you know how much it really helped. You made me feel better about a bad situation when I was convinced that I couldn't fix it. But you helped me put together a plan to make everything work. They felt like they were lost in a situation that they didn't know how to navigate by themselves, but they felt supported that I was going through it together with them. There are many things that we can do, but there are even more things that we can do when we do it together. And part of being intentional and taking the time to reach out and notice is helping students know that they don't have to do all of these things by themselves, and they shouldn't have to. So if we go on to the next slide, I do believe that this is connecting towards my PhD, and I'll wrap up now. Sorry for being a little bit longer. But yeah, coming from a specific physics background, I know that physics culture is still, to this day, primarily white, primarily male, primarily able-bodied, primarily cisgender, primarily a lot of these things. Of all of the sciences, it is the one that's struggling the most. However, we do have more people joining the degree, even if not a lot of things in the past 20 years have changed. And so I'm really curious to figure out why, what causes people to stay, and what specifically is pulling them in, what's making them hopeful that this is more of a place for them. Sometimes it does seem to be some of these conversations and just knowing that people actually care that they're sleeping enough and that they have enough time to eat and that they have finances and that they know how to get accommodations and support. So keep an eye out for future work, likely under the name of Talking About Staying, as I continue to do that. And I will now cede the rest of the time for other students to specifically tell you about their experiences as well of getting support and what they wish that other people asked them about and were intentional about. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. It's Stephanie again, the other one. And I invite my 3 amazing students to introduce themselves, Taya, Ashton, and Lauren, who've all joined us. And they're going to be answering a couple of questions directly because Stephanie's research is the foundation of something that these students and many others are willing to talk about. We have a few in the chat as attendee as well. Megan in the chat has contributed the question. So Taya, could you introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Taya Gendrika. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm an early childhood educator. I have a BA in education, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and I'm going back to school for my bachelor's degree of education to become a teacher. Yeah, so that's me.
Woo. Ash, can you intro yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Ashton, she, her pronouns. I am one of Stephanie's previous SAS students, and I have a BA in forensic psychology, minoring in criminology, and I'm currently awaiting to hear if I've made it into my master's of social work. And I am a student with invisible disabilities.
And of course, last but not least, Lauren.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lauren. I've been working with the Stephanie that is currently speaking for, I'd say, around 5 years, maybe now. I have invisible disabilities. I have a nonverbal learning disability as well as ADHD. And I am currently studying and going on to my second year of my Bachelor of Social Work.
Woo. And so we'll go to the first question we have for our panelists. So while not all of our students we could have speaking today, because we have a huge group of students that are willing to share their experiences alongside Taya, Ash, and Lauren, who are here right now, and Megan in the chat. Thank you all. We've built kind of a series of questions that Stephanie, the other Stephanie, will be addressing in her research and all the incredible work she's going to be doing beyond that. But one of the quotes we've had from some of these conversations goes, "Sometimes there's misconceptions between people with disabilities and non-disabled persons." I think it's like, I don't have that. I don't need that. But having accessibility will help you in the future. It doesn't mean to do it just for people with disability. I look at accessibility to help for anyone. So for our panelists, what do you wish, specifically in the education sphere, your instructors knew or didn't assume about you? And Taya, I think you're up first.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And sometimes I wish that instructors would sometimes ask that outright. I think I wish my instructors, I would understood that my good and bad days can fluctuate. And while they're good intended, like get better soon messages that I receive back are kind and they mean it. It can sometimes leave me feeling kind of invalidated by these remarks because they kind of serve as a reminder that my illness is chronic and I can't simply get better one day, which can be upsetting at times. And even though they're aware of my chronic illnesses and disabilities, they sometimes ask if I'm feeling better. And the truth is, I'm just feeling less bad than usual. I also wish that they could maybe like experience a sort of Freaky Friday swap with me, so they could understand why my accommodation needs are valid, regardless of my academic success. They might even see how implementing my accommodations and others' accommodations in the class could be beneficial for everyone, as it could simplify things for them because they'd no longer need to manage individual accommodations and plans for me and others, but instead see that there's benefits for that throughout the whole class.
Ash?
Yeah, just get the mute off. Well, I've got a combination of both physical and mental health disabilities, and it's hard to say which one affects my life worse. And honestly, I wish professors understood that I can't just make my problems go away by working harder or putting in the extra effort, because I do put in the extra effort. I feel like I have to put in even more effort than the average person just because of my disabilities. Multiple of my physical disabilities are chronic pain disabilities, and it gets in the way of just being able to sit in a class for a 3-hour lecture. And I really wish that teachers understood that I'm not lazy or a slacker, or I'm not focused or paying attention if I have to get up and walk around or be someone who doesn't just take notes during class. I have to record them and take my notes afterwards because it's too hard to focus when you're in pain in the classroom setting. And I just wish, I wish they understood that I just learn differently and that I'm not incapable of learning what they're trying to teach. It may just take me a different route to get there. Different methods, but same end goal. And I will work really hard to succeed in school, but it just may not look the way they believe it should look, or it may not happen in the same way that they would like it to. And I wish it was okay for everyone, including other staff members and students, that there can be more than one way to achieve success in education. And it's not just a one size fits all kind of deal. And one more thing I'd like to add is I feel like having both mental health, like severe ADD and ADHD and a little tismy, having the mental deficits as well as physical illnesses, I find that my accommodations are met more frequently by professors and accepted easier by professors when it comes to my physical ailments and my chronic pain disorders, and that any of my learning disabilities or my mental health aspects are not actually taken as seriously, and therefore the accommodations for those are less accepted, whereas the ones for my physical ailments are more accepted. And I wish that the teachers understood that those coincide. One always provokes another. The more pain I'm in, the less I can focus, the more distracted I am. The more distracted I am, the more I panic or I stress, and that stress increases my inflammation and increases my pain, and it's cyclical. And all of that is happening in this time frame of a teacher sitting there looking at a class of students wondering why I'm so fidgety and why I can't pay attention when everybody else seems to be able to do so. Before I run on too long, I'll just cut it there.
Amazing points. Lauren?
Very well said to both of you guys, the other fellow panelists speaking before. I guess one thing that has really stood out to me about what I wish my instructors knew about me would really revolve around my ADHD diagnosis, which was more so recent than my learning disability diagnosis. And when it comes to struggling with ADHD, I find one of the biggest barriers when it comes to doing work is the willingness to actually want to get it done. I find as a student, I'm constantly being told all these barriers and limitations when it comes to assignments or these like guidelines that are never really structured in quite an understandable way. Whereas then I kind of have to go on and make something that is expected to be perfectly understood by somebody's brain who I can't fully get inside, somebody who doesn't experience the same struggles with nonverbal LD. And I just think similar to what Ashton and Tay had both said, I think there needs to be a new level of, I guess, understanding and compassion towards that stuff, because growing up and feeling less understood or, for lack of a better word, stupid could be very like demeaning and really hurt while growing up. And I wish that they knew that things sometimes had to be a bit more engaging, and that by making something engaging may benefit some students with disability, but it wouldn't necessarily affect or negate or do anything bad towards the students without. I'll stop myself there.
Accessibility never harms anyone, contrary to how many people push back on it. Just as a adding that, but thank you all. So we'll go to the next slide. And we have another quote from a student who's also in the chat, Leaf. You inspired this second piece, and she's there to also share her experiences. So Megan and Leaf, thank you for being in the chat, as well as for our 3 students here. So Colgren 2025. When I go home, I can cosplay as able-bodied because my home is designed for me. So to our 3 lovely panelists, what would it look like if the world was made for you? How could we achieve that? And feel free to be really specific and call people out if you need. I know we're being very formal, but informality is also welcome. So go ahead, Taya.
Well, I think in a world designed for me, I'd love to have real-time closed captions that would just appear as people spoke, allowing me to better process conversations to aid with my audio processing challenges. I'd love to have mobility aids available for rent, kind of like how they do in the city with bikes and scooters. So I could access support when I need it without having to kind of plan ahead on whether my body is going to work for me or not. And I think I'd love if hospitals were functioning like they do on TV, where they swiftly identify your mysterious illnesses so you could suffer less and receive answers sooner, so you didn't have to take so much time off of school or even work in your personal life as well, because then it seems like you kind of have to pick one and stay with that. So then it seems like academia is where I would go. So I'd just be stuck with just schooling. And then which would kind of make my illnesses a little bit worse. And then I do wish that medications were free as well, because it would relieve a financial burden for me of choosing between basic survival and things that I kind of want and need in life to be happy. And so instead of constantly worrying about whether I can afford to pay rent this month or simply just exist. So that's what I think a world should look like for me.
Excellent. I like all the financial considerations. I feel like we need more free everywhere. How about you, Ash?
Well, I would instantly second everything Teo was mentioning. The financial burdens are unreasonable sometimes. The cost of my medications alone monthly was bankrupting me. And it actually took a long time for me to admit that I needed help with my accessibilities, and I didn't apply for any kind of disability funding from the government until I was about 32 years old. And it does help a little bit. But even still, it's kind of funny how disability services will help pay for part of your medications, but don't pay for the specialty testing it requires to keep up with the side effects of your medications. Like one of mine will make me go blind someday, and so I have to pay for some eye doctor's appointments out of pocket, even though 2 of those appointments will be covered, but I have 3 separate tests per year I have to do just because of my medications. And it seems kind of silly that the medication would be covered, but the problems or the side effects would not be. So I agree with all the financial stuff Teo was talking about. For me, it would be nice if it was just a world that was more accepting of what I was talking about in my previous answer, that it's not just about school goals, life goals in general, that it's okay to take different paths or have different methods of getting to an end goal, whether that be, a nuclear family with a house and kids and a partner, or that be an adventure seeking travel person, whatever it may be. It just looks a little bit different when you have disabilities. And unfortunately, I don't have a lot of help or accessibility services in my day-to-day life. And I try to accommodate myself as best as I can to fit into the regular world. Whereas I wish it didn't take that much effort to accommodate myself into the world, I prefer if we could all just coexist and it didn't really matter how I functioned or how I got from point A to point B. It'd be really nice to just exist and be okay with existing as I am, you know, be accepted for what others may consider my faults. And the success outside of school is limiting. I mean, I didn't have a great deal of support in school up until my later years when I really figured out how to use the accessibility services properly. And then I realized how much help there could be. And I wondered why I'd never heard of any of it outside of school, outside of post-secondary education. Just trying to get from a big parking lot to my doctor's appointment sometimes is difficult and painful. And I wish it was more acceptable for people with invisible disabilities to remove the stigma of asking for help. I've still avoided asking for a parking permit to park in disabled sections because I look able-bodied and I try to walk tall and strong. So you don't want people looking at you like you don't need the help or you shouldn't be offered those kind of supports. I'll pass it on to Lauren.
Thank you, Ash. Very well said. I guess if the world was made to look for me, a majority of the places where I find my stressors would probably be executively functioning, so within like social groups or really in academic environments. I'd say school-wise, if the world was made to look for me, there would be a lot more interprofessional and like between the different like academic student like studies and disciplines, there'd be a lot more communication between professors and where to go for accessibility needs. I know personally, I faced a lot of pushback when looking for the right person to contact for my program, for my accessibility needs, and was consistently redirected and brought to different people, and honestly just ran myself in circles, stressing myself out a lot more than I felt was necessary. And definitely, I feel could have been done a lot faster if somebody had just been provided the right information of who their students should be able to contact. Whereas I guess more so in like an everyday life thing is similar to both, I guess, what Ashton and Taya were saying is I wish there was less stigma around invisible disability, and I wish there was a bit more understanding. Growing up, I feel I faced a lot of pushback as well for asking for the accessibility needs that are needs for somebody who's facing a disadvantage academically and with an LD. And I've constantly faced pushback being told that I'll never have the same access to information as the quote unquote smart people. And kind of situations like that being put down. And if the world was made for me, I think that people would take a second and think through what they're thinking in their head about the person who's asking for assistance in whatever way it is, and understand that you don't know anybody else's story. So understand before you comment on it. And I'll stop myself there.
You all are amazing. You literally shared so much, and we're doing well on time, which is so not our style. But thank you. That's so insightful, and it's so important to hear from the students. And we'll have more time for Q&A as well. But I want to say that based on Lauren's thing, can you go to the next slide, please? We're not done here. So before we go to more questions and more sharing and everything that like the students can share with us today, as well as the other Stephanie. We have a lot of amazing people in the chat, in our presentation, and in our community. We want to keep holding space. The Including Disability Global Summit is great. Like, we love this space, but Lauren has been saying for a long time that we might need a little bit more. So if you have any interest in that, or you want to help us facilitate that, please fill out the Google form. We'll put a link in the chat and we will follow up with you afterwards. Some of our thoughts so far have been a hyperfixation presentation night, and hanging out and sharing some of our passions and excitements, as well as Stephanie just suggested this. Maybe we all need to watch Crip Camp together. I feel like that, yes, I would love to do that movie night. So those are just two of our pitches. So join us in this. And we finished early. So what we're going to do is turn it back over to the community. And I have a few questions if you all don't. So thank you so much for listening. We hope you join us in cultivating more spaces like this, where our incredible students and like colleagues, we got staff, students, faculty, everyone can benefit from sharing space and supporting one another. We know it works. So join us as our call to action. So I am also the moderator. So I get the privilege of kind of asking the panelists. So I'll ask Ash, Elizabeth, and Lauren to come back if they're willing, ready, and we'll stop sharing our slides. And so now we have time. And I will say our panelists spoke to us in advance saying, this is the time. You have a group here of people who are willing to answer, you know, questions, comments, queries, and willing to share their experiences with you. So I didn't see anything explicit other than the meta glasses. So I feel like I'm going to abuse my position as moderator and say to everyone, so not just our three wonderful panelists, but like Stephanie and Elizabeth, what hacks do you have? What resources and hacks do you have? Because I know we want to create a better world. We are trying to cultivate better spaces, hold better spaces, but a lot of institutions, they're not very friendly. So what hacks, resources, things do you share and work with? I'm thinking like Goblin tools. I'm thinking, yes, you can have a Stephanie, but there aren't enough Stephanies to go around, though there are two here. What are other resources you would like to share with our audience? Go, Ash.
I only just started using it probably my last couple weeks of my undergrad, which wasn't overly helpful, but they did start me using a program called Glean, and I felt that was really helpful for university students. It allowed me to record my lectures, but also have the visual representation of these slides going as well, so I could link the audio recording to the slides. And for me, I had accommodations to be able to record my lectures, but it was left up to me to find a recording device and record it myself and figure out how best to manage that. And I was originally recording on an old school device, and then I would come home and I'd re-listen to the lecture, and during class, I would have to write down or stop focusing on the teacher for a minute to still write down the time on my recorder per slide, so that I was able to match up the slides with the lecture. And sometimes teachers will go back and forth between slides a couple of times. So it does get quite confusing, and Glean was able to do that. And as far as I was testing it, it's pretty good on the transcription. But that other people who have certain learning disabilities like I do, it's very helpful having both the auditory and the visual stimulation paired properly. Makes a very big difference, especially in how I'm making notes. So I would promote Glean for sure.
And I will add, if you are enrolled at a university or you currently work at a university, sometimes there is an equivalent note-taking software at Ontario Tech University, where I met some of these wonderful folks in Canada. Glean was provided by the Student Accessibility Services. So that license was done through that unit, but there are free alternatives. The Stephanies. All right. Any other tips, tricks, hacks, tech? Go ahead, Taya.
A good tip or trick is to also like maybe find somebody in your life who also either has neurodivergence or has a similar not similar disability, but just a disability in general, because just having somebody who has kind of that empathy towards what you're going through can help a lot. And if you're going through school, it is also nice. I was working as a peer tutor as a accessibilities coach, and that's where I met Ash. I was her accessibilities coach. And so we would body double a lot. And I find that body doubling, whether or not it's for like an ADHD or anything like that, is helpful in general, just because it does keep you motivated, and it helps keep you focused on what you were doing. So it doesn't matter if they're in your school or not, even if it's just someone in your life. I think it's great to have that human connection.
And Lauren, go ahead.
I was just gonna add, similar to Ashton's suggestion, an app that I only recently discovered that just has helped with my time management is called My Study Life. It's another just good app for school where you're able to put your courses in. It syncs up your courses with which professor is attached to that course, what class and material you're taking, as well as like where it is, location and time. Honestly, it was really incredible. It lines up all of your tasks in order by date as well, depending on when they're due and which ones due first and which assignments you have or tests you have first or like next week or anything. It was a very helpful app. Really recommend it to anybody who is interested or has some not great time management skills like me.
And I'll jump in too, because I want to first second what Tay was saying about body doubling, because that is the greatest thing. But also very similar to what Lauren was just saying, I find Notion as an app to be
Notion.
exceptionally helpful, because you can truly dump any file type in there, and it'll just keep it there, and it's wonderful. But what I'll also add, and this is not like app specific, but I have found timed reminders to be really helpful, because I can have a to-do list and then set a time for each task to be completed at. And so it helps me schedule my day out and like put everything in there. And then just like keep me accountable, because you get that little like 1, 2, 3 popping up on your phone. So that sort of thing has also been really helpful for me. It makes me come off like a really organized person when in fact I would forget to do everything without it. But yeah, that's what I would add there.
Yeah, just to tag in and to add on and maybe also address some things a little bit all at once. Offloading cognition overwhelmingly is just a great way in whatever app that you can do. I think I struggled a lot with that when I was first kind of recognizing what I was dealing with and digesting that. And I had a really great friend who just looked at me and was like, why would you feel bad for using tools that were made to help? Like, that was the point. It's disrespectful, honestly, to all of the work that went into making those tools that you're not using them. So like, use them. So I feel a lot less bad about the joke that I make about running off of coffee and calendar notifications these days, because why should I feel bad about it? I think for the question in the chat around convincing people to body double, offering something else that you could offer to them sometimes is very helpful. And I've done that as well, where like there are certain things that I enjoy doing more that other people don't, and vice versa. So like, I am so happy to help you reorganize your closet and like put your laundry away if you will wash my dishes. Like we can trade then as well. And I found that helpful when I was an undergrad, and now as far as like trading accountability for other people's assignments. I find that for myself and for a lot of other neurodivergent people, I'm very extrinsically motivated. So convincing myself to do something, it's not it. Even when I have those little apps, it's not helpful. So one of the apps that I used previously for a more distance friend was it was like a focus app for trees, and you can do it specifically together. And so like if either one of you dips out of your focus tree app, I think it's Forest is just what it's called. If either one of you leaves during that, both of your trees die. So I'm way more motivated then. But so that helps in itself. But as far as like a structure and a studying, when trying to like body double or do things with people and thinking about extrinsic motivation kind of all at once, studying for myself, really difficult. You put a lot of shame onto what you should already know. And that makes it, I think, harder to make a plan and to make concept maps and to do any of these other tools. But studying when you're trying to teach someone else what to do, well, that's great. Then you get to think about it from the very beginning about what you would want to learn when you knew nothing. So one thing that me and a lot of my other neurodivergent friends did in kind of lieu of raw body doubling when we were in undergrad was when we studied, we would give faux lectures to each other on topics that we were all confused about. And we would go in a circle on the same exact topic. One person would start and they would try to teach the topic that we were all confused about, and people would purposefully ask them questions about things that they knew the faux lecturer was talking about and was confused on, or they themselves were confused on. And then we would cycle through. By the time we got through everyone doing a faux lecture, everyone was feeling a lot more confident on that topic. And something like that might be helpful to convince people to do more together. But just kind of thinking about not studying for me as the subject, but like if I was training someone raw, and sometimes I would convince like my partner at the time who was in social work to listen to my physics books, and that worked out really well because I had no expectation that he would know anything. Hopefully those things help. I find them fun.